What's up YouTube, Zero here, and today I have an absolutely fun Donphan EX and Lucario deck in Pokemon TCG Pocket. In this video, I'll go over the deck build that you can see on the left hand side of the screen. I'll talk about each of these cards individually, and I'll talk about why this deck is extremely fun, it's going to get you a lot of wins, and why you should check this out in Pokemon TCG Pocket. Before I get into it, I do want to say if you do enjoy this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more Pokemon TCG Pocket content. I do a bunch of other video games, so feel free to check those out as well. Without further ado, let's talk about this Donphan EX and Lucario deck in Pokemon TCG Pocket, and I want to talk about the star of the show, Donphan EX. So Donphan EX, for just one fighting energy, is Gigantic Press. Does 50 damage. However, there's a caveat. If this Pokemon has at least 2 extra fighting energy attached, this attack does 60 more damage. So for one fighting energy, Gigantic Press is going to do 50 damage. If you have 3 fighting energy on Donphan EX, it's going to be 110 damage. So of course, you're going to be grinding on Donphan EX when you play it to get those 3 energy, so you're dealing a lot more damage. However, what's nice is that Donphan EX can just attack with 1 fighting energy, so you don't have to grind to at least start attacking. You're going to be able to attack with just 1 energy, so that's extremely nice to be able to do so. There are certain EX Pokemon that do take a while to grind for energy. You're just sitting there taking damage. Donphan EX is not like that. All you have to do is evolve, equip 1 energy, and you're dealing 50 damage with Gigantic Press. So that's pretty nice. Donphan EX is going to be found in the Wisdom of Sea and Sky Ho-Oh packs. Now, of course, to evolve into Donphan EX, you'd need its basic, and that's going to be Phanpy. Phanpy, 1 fighting energy, Reckless Charge for 30 damage. The Pokemon also does 10 damage to itself. I actually do like basic Pokemon that deal 30 damage because there are more and more Pokemon in this game that have 30 HP or pretty low HP. The baby Pokemon just came out. They have only 30 HP. So if you are dealing 30 damage with your basic, you're going to make your opponent pay for putting that baby Pokemon in that active slot. So I do like dealing the 30 damage with Reckless Charge, which is awesome. And Phanpy is going to be found in the Wisdom of Sea and Sky Ho-Oh packs as well. Now let's move on to the Pokemon that's almost required with Donphan EX. It's going to be a Lucario. Lucario has been around for a while, and it's still a phenomenal card for fighting type decks. Lucario is an amazing card for anyone who's running a fighting type deck because of its ability. So Lucario's ability is Fighting Coach. Attacks used by your fighting Pokemon do plus 20 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So that means any of the Pokemon who are in the active slot, as long as Lucario is on the field of play, are going to do an increased 20 damage. This effect also stacks, so if you have 2 Lucarios on the field of play, your fighting type Pokemon are going to do an additional 40 damage. So that's pretty nice as well. It's not just 20 from one, but if you are able to get both Lucarios out there, it's going to be an additional 40. So if Donphan EX has 3 energy equipped, it's dealing 110 damage. Add those 2 Lucarios and Donphan EX can deal 150 damage. That's absolutely phenomenal. It's not too hard to get to. It's not extremely easy, but it's not too hard to get to. You can see in this video I was able to get those 2 Lucarios out there. I just needed the extra energy, but once you are able to get that extra energy, you're dealing a ton of damage. So it is really nice to have. Lucario is going to be found in the Space-Time Smackdown Dialga packs. Lucario also has a move where if you do need to play it in the active slot, it can deal some damage. It's not amazing, it's not awful. So for 2 fighting energy, Submarine Blow deals 40 damage. However, the ability Fighting Coach also applies to this Submarine Blow. So in reality, it's not 40 damage, it's 60 damage, because Lucario is going to be active when you're attacking with Submarine Blow. So it's at least 60 damage that you're going to be hitting for 2 energy, which again, like I said, is not great. It's not an amazing amount of damage, but you can attack with Lucario if need be. So you do need Riolu, of course, to evolve into Lucario. There are multiple Riolus in this game. I go with the Riolu that for 1 fighting energy is jab for 20 damage. There's another Riolu that to attack you need 2 energy. I just like attacking with 1 energy, just getting it out there, attacking as quickly as possible if I do start with Riolu. And this is going to be the Riolu in the Space-Time Smackdown Dialga packs, just like you're finding the Lucario in those packs as well. So next, I have one of each of these Pokemon. I have one Sudowoodo, and I have one Hitmontop. Now, you could, if you wanted to, go with 2 of one or 2 of the other. If you wanted 2 Hitmontops, I'm not going to fault you for it. On the same turn, if you want 2 Sudowoodos, I'm not going to fault you for that as well. I like both of these Pokemon, and each of them play a role, which is why I have one of each in this deck. But if you do swing one way or the other, if you just want 2 of one of these Pokemon, I'm not going to fault you too much, but I like having one of each. Let me start with talking about Hitmontop, because Hitmontop has actually won me a few battles pretty much by itself. Hitmontop is a fantastic Pokemon. It's not a new concept. There are Pokemon in the game that do this, but this is the fighting type of this style. And so Hitmontop has for 1 fighting energy piercing spin for 20 damage, but also the attack does 20 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. That's really nice to have, being able to deal 20 damage to the active Pokemon as well as 20 damage to one of the bench Pokemon. There are a lot of bench Pokemon in the game that an opponent is putting there to either build up energy, to evolve into, what have you, and you're going to start chipping away that HP, so they're going to be weakened later in battle. I love Hitmontop for that reason. It is always really nice to be able to hit your opponent's benched Pokemon, because you can really throw off your opponent and really get to the point where they're on their heels because they have a Pokemon on their bench that is damaged. So now you're going to be able to even more so have the upper hand, because their active Pokemon's damage and 1 or 2, if you're continually attacking, of their bench Pokemon are damaged as well. So I do love Hitmontop, fantastic Pokemon, and you can find Hitmontop in either of the Wisdom of Sea and Sky packs. Doesn't matter which one, you can just find Hitmontop in one of those packs. Last but not least, Sudowoodo. A phenomenal card, has been around a little while. I do like having one Sudowoodo in this deck because there are a lot of EX Pokemon that are run in almost every deck. A lot of decks have EX Pokemon. Sudowoodo is going to be nice to deal with those EX Pokemon. And so Sudowoodo has Fighting Headbutt. It does 20 damage for 1 fighting energy. However, if your opponent's active Pokemon is a Pokemon EX, this attack does 30 more damage. So against non-EX Pokemon, Sudowoodo does 20 damage. Against EX Pokemon, Sudowoodo is doing 50 damage. This is absolutely phenomenal to get out into that active slot and really start hitting hard some of those EX Pokemon. If you think about some of the prominent ones, Darkrai EX that only has 140 HP. You can kill Darkrai EX with Sudowoodo in 3 turns by hitting it for 50 after 50 after 50. Giratina, same thing, has 150 HP, so 3 turns hitting with your Sudowoodo, and you can finish off the Giratina. So there are a lot of Pokemon in the game that are only going to take 3 turns from your Sudowoodo to finish them off. So that's really nice. I love having one in this deck. I love having one Hitmontop because you can kind of play one of these Pokemon depending on how the battle is going. Depending upon what your opponent's deck is, you can see what their deck is and then make the determination as to which Pokemon you need to utilize. So I absolutely love Sudowoodo, and when combined with one Lucario, you're now dealing 70 damage to a Pokemon EX, and 70 damage is a 2-shot on a Darkrai EX now, and not a 3-shot. So that's actually pretty awesome, is that there are certain EX Pokemon in the game, of course barring a giant cape or another form of HP increase, that you can 2-shot, which is really nice for a basic Pokemon and 1 energy. Sudowoodo is going to be found in the Triumphant Light packs. So I like one of each again, but it really depends on how you want to play it and how you want to approach this deck. But I found one of each is really nice to have. Next, a couple of cards that are in pretty much every deck. This is no different. Pokeball, going to put a random basic Pokemon from your deck into your hand. And Professor's Research, you draw 2 cards. Next, Sabrina. Sabrina is, of course, one of my favorites. It really is a phenomenal card, a phenomenal trainer card to have in any deck. You can throw off your opponent's strategy by forcing the active Pokemon out of that active slot. You can force a Pokemon on the bench to that active slot that your opponent may not want there. It can really throw off your opponent's strategy. You can force a Pokemon that has a high retreat cost from the bench to that active slot. It's just a really great card to have. And for those of you who don't know what Sabrina does, switch out your opponent's active Pokemon to the bench. Of course, your opponent chooses the new active Pokemon. Sabrina can be found in the Genetic Apex Charizard packs. Next, I have 2 Cyruses. This deck is extremely good at damaging the bench, but it's also going to allow your opponent to retreat some of their Pokemon. As I mentioned, Hitmontop can hit Pokemon on the bench, so this is going to leave a Cyrus play as you're hitting Pokemon on the bench, damaging them. You can switch in that damaged Pokemon to the active slot. Donphan, before it gets its 3 energy, is going to be hitting opponents for 50 damage, so that may not finish off a lot of powerful Pokemon. Those Pokemon may end up getting retreated to the bench, so you may want to utilize Cyrus to pull those Pokemon out. There are a lot of uses for Cyrus. It's phenomenal to have. I do have 2 of them, again, because this deck is kind of going to leave open an opportunity to pull damaged Pokemon from the bench to that active slot, especially with Hitmontop. So you can really damage your opponent and catch them off guard by utilizing Hitmontop plus Cyrus, which is why I love it in this deck, and I love 2 of them in this deck. So of course, Cyrus, you switch in one of your opponent's benched Pokemon that has damage on it to the active slot. And Cyrus is going to be found in the Space-Time Smackdown Palkia packs. Next, I have one of each of these supporter cards. I have 1 Mars and 1 Lyra. First, I'm going to talk about Mars. Mars can be pretty important at times. There are times where Mars isn't great. There are times where Mars is really good. So Mars, your opponent shuffles their hand into their deck and draws a card for each of their remaining points needed to win. So depending on how many cards your opponent has in his or her hand, Mars is going to be great to utilize. Of course, as the game goes on, maybe your opponent has a point or 2, you can really hinder them by making them put all of their cards back into their deck and only drawing 1 or 2 cards. There are also a lot of players that utilize cards such as your Professor's Research, which of course I use in all of my decks. On top of that, Sylveon, whose ability is essentially a Professor's Research as soon as it evolves from Eevee into Sylveon. A lot of decks utilize that. A lot of decks can build up cards really quickly. So Mars is a way of throwing all of those cards back into your opponent's deck so they can't implement their strategy. Mars is going to slow down your opponent, allowing you to set up your Donphan and your Lucario so you can deal as much damage as possible. So I like Mars in this deck. I do have one just in case it's needed for some of those decks that draw cards really fast. Mars is going to be found in the Space-Time Smackdown Palkia packs. Last but not least, Lyra. Lyra, you switch your active Pokemon that has damage on it with one of your benched Pokemon, and this card is going to be found in the Wisdom of Sea and Sky Lugia packs. Lyra is actually a pretty useful card. Lyra can be almost the equivalent of Leaf. However, what Leaf does is Leaf lessens the retreat cost, where Lyra, as long as your Pokemon, any of your Pokemon in the active slot has damage on it, you can essentially retreat it for free. So Donphan EX that has a 3 retreat cost is a free retreat as long as it has damage on it. Lucario, 2 retreat cost, as long as it has damage, you can retreat it. Sudowoodo, 2 retreat cost. Hitmontop, 2 retreat cost. Fanpea, this deck has a high retreat cost for every Pokemon in this deck. So utilizing Lyra if you want to get a Pokemon out of that active slot, especially if you don't want to waste energy, Lyra is going to allow you to do that, which is really nice, a really nice card to have, especially in decks where you have insanely high retreat costs. So I do like Lyra in this deck, so you don't have to waste energy by retreating a Pokemon. You can just utilize Lyra if your Pokemon is injured and get them onto the bench. So, phenomenal card to have. That's the deck, and it's really fun and really solid. It does a lot of damage when you start getting rolling. I just think of rollout. You're rolling. Donphan was known for rollout when it first came out, but it was a phenomenal Pokemon, and it's a pretty good card to have. Like I said, 1 energy for 50 is nice, so you can at least start attacking with Donphan. Once you get those 3 energy on, you're going to be dealing 110 damage, which is okay. But as soon as you get Lucario going, Donphan is really going to get going and really going to take out a lot of powerful Pokemon. It's nice to start with either Hitmontop or Sudowoodo, so either you can deal high damage to an EX Pokemon of your opponent, or you can start damaging a Pokemon on the bench, which allows it to be set up for Cyrus to be pulled out to that active slot. Sabrina is nice to throw off your opponent's strategy. Of course, Mars going to throw off your opponent's strategy as well and slow them down. Lyra is going to allow you to avoid some of the high retreat costs in this deck to move a Pokemon that has damage on it from the active slot to the bench. I absolutely am having fun with this Donphan EX deck. It is a really solid deck. I've won a lot of games with this Donphan EX deck. It is a very good card. And like I said, where some EX Pokemon do kind of fall short is the fact that they can't attack for a while. They have a high attack cost, and you're just sitting there taking damage as you're building up energy. Donphan EX doesn't have that problem. 1 energy and it's capable of attacking, which is really nice. It's weakening your opponent, whichever Pokemon your opponent puts in that active slot, so you don't have to worry necessarily about building the energy up. You already have an energy and you're able to attack, which is really nice. And of course, like I said, Lucario is phenomenal for any fighting deck. Let me know in the comments section what you think of this deck. Have you utilized it? If you have, are there some substitutions of cards that you would make to make this deck better? I know I've seen several variations of this deck online. I like this one, but again, if you want to substitute out a Sudowoodo for another Hitmontop or vice versa, I'm not going to fault you for that at all. If you want to substitute out one of these supporter cards for a different supporter card, again, there are a lot of plays with this deck. The major sticking points of this deck is Donphan EX with Lucario. That's pretty much the deck, and then throw in what you like. However, like I said, Hitmontop is phenomenal, especially when combined with Cyrus. You can get Hitmontop into that active slot, just start damaging your opponent's Pokemon. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and again, if you did, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and until next time, peace.